Hello. Today I am here to talk about Saturn, in this case the second house, as it is actually one of my configurations. And why I want to talk about Saturn is because it is the planet of our limitations. It is also the ruler of the 10th house, which is authority. And so it is often thought that Saturn being a representation of a father figure in your life. In addition to the sun, how your father shaped you, my son being in the 9th house, my father being deeply religious, and me being born with gifts that were otherworldly and other knowledgeable, and how it impacted my self-esteem, Saturn in the second house. Now, the second house is the house of objects, and I have that in Sagittarius, which again goes back to that 9th house, my dad and his high faith. Okay, there's a couple of different ways that information is reiterated. And so why I'm talking about this is I'm 61 at this point. I've spent 61 years looking for ways to feel okay about myself. Now, I think a lot of people have self-esteem issues, maybe not as significantly and notable as mine were, but nonetheless, it's self-esteem, especially in today's world, is a really big issue. As I watch things unfold in relation to whether or not you should go and get the jab. I realize I've talked about this before, but I have some real strong feelings about it. I'm not eligible to get it because I've had anaphylaxis too many times, and very recently had anaphylaxis. So it isn't going to have to be something that happens for me. And as I am somebody I'm doing my work, my shadow work, to resolve my self-esteem issues, which, believe me, we all have them. It's a matter of self-truth, whether or not you agree or admit to such an issue. We all have an issue with self-esteem in some ways. And why I want to talk about it, these flies are kind of coming around, is that I want people to be aware of why you might think the way you do. Perhaps self-esteem has impacted you in such a way that authority hasn't exactly been a good relationship in your soul. A lot of us, in my dad's case, he means well. My dad is a double Pisces, which means that he kind of has where he thinks is in the 12th house, and how he functions is in the 12th house, which is your house of institutions, your unseen energy. Okay, so he did the best he could, but he raised us by himself, which kind of furthered my sense of alienation and self-esteem, because my mom, as a child, ran away from home. And quite frankly, my dad was difficult for her, and of course it took me many years, in fact up until very recently, on this process of learning to truly read an astrology chart. I was able to take both my parents' charts in addition to my own, and I was really able to chart out a real pattern of ancestral, if you will, self-esteem dilemmas, where my parents were basically children attempting to raise children, doing the best they knew how, and coming up way short. And I think that might be truth for a lot of us, because I think that ancestrally we've come to this spot where we're very wounded as souls. And so self-esteem, and what is the second house? Well, in my case, it's the house of objects, where we were so poor at times, and maybe even poor-minded at times, that I didn't even have 2 socks that matched. I was fortunate if on a regular basis I got clothes for school, um, and I don't want to complain. I don't want to make it seem like I'm saying, you know, that my parents failed, because it really is a pointless thing to blame, because I believe that we agree as before this lifetime occurs. I believe in reincarnation, so I want to say that, and I believe that basically we agree to the parents we get and we get the parents that we need for the agreements we have. And some of us, in my case, where I clearly had parents who were not invested in being parents. They met as teenagers. They went to high school together, and their childhood blended into their adulthood, and they found that they had nothing in common and didn't like each other. And so when they divorced, who they really divorced was my brother, my sister, and myself. And I think this speaks to an ancestral wound that a lot of us share. A lot of us have mothers who have left the nest. And I want to go on further to say that even my daughter, who struggles right now to raise her children, who has had 3 children, one of which I raised myself, and who is now an adult. He's 21 years old, and is making his own way now. Graduated from high school, which I'm abundantly grateful, because he and I will be introducing him. This will be Sid that will be coming on board, because we're going to talk about, again, that ancestral process of our parents not really being properly equipped to do the job that is before them. And this is by no means judgment on anyone. I myself struggled to raise my 2 children. Because my self-esteem, because of the way I went about things. I turned 18, and I ran out of the frying pan right into the fire, and I met somebody, and 5 minutes later we were married, and I was pregnant, and 10 minutes after that, you know, it was very clear we had nothing in common. So there we go again, that cycle repeating itself. But whose fault is that? Well, really no one's. It's a process of evolution. And in fact, I think that it's sufficient to say that it's appropriate to look backwards. And even things that were painful, difficult, and unworldly need to be remembered in ways as lessons that brought you forward to where you are today. Everything in your life happens to prepare you for the next step. So self-esteem, how does this factor? Well, you know, I just think right now that a lot of people don't trust authority for lots of good reasons, but they haven't maybe totally respected the fact that they're so much greater than they know, and that we are having this great I am experience. I think that many of us are called to be here at this time for very specific and important reasons. So if you're here on this planet, you know, pinch yourself. You know, you're here. You've made it to this, whatever this is. You're here, and you're involved, and you're needed. And for me, being needed, being relevant, being a part of, has been my challenge. How do I sort through? I've always been psychic. There's not been a time in my life where my psychic skills haven't been a big part of who I am. And because I grew up in a home that was deeply religious, I often felt, as I talk about self-esteem, that I was demon-possessed, because I would see myself at the feet of Jesus, for instance, hanging on the cross. Like I said, my parents were religious, you know, and so I would see myself as a young child, you know, in my sleep. And I don't know why we have so many flies here today. But anyway, I would often see myself as somebody that I'm going to move to a different. Okay, I moved over a little bit. I'm going to straighten that out a little. And I'm just sitting over here, kind of right by. I'm in Mahukona still today, or again today. And so self-esteem. You know, we are judgmental towards ourselves. We come into this life in a higher agreement. Many of us are here at this time to do this light work that we've been called to do. And I'm kind of beginning to realize that those of us who are resilient went through a good deal in our childhood and find ourselves in this light working kind of energy today. This is our time. This is what we were meant to do. This was some of the reason for the many things we had to go through. These are markers of who you are. And so it would be my sense that those of us, and I'm even going to extend this beyond myself, if you have problems with addiction, you're probably a light worker, and you probably have a self-esteem issue, and you probably are drowning in your sorrows because, well, you're not using your resilience, okay? But resilience is something that personally I've always had. The way I see it, and my sister as well, you know, we're like the two of us survived our childhood differently than my brother. My brother is fine. He's done well for himself in many, many respects, but he's not really all that connected to the spiritual side of it, which is no big deal. But my sister and I were like two people that cling to a stripped tree of everything it had. We hang on to the outer trunk together, and we're stripped naked. That's how we felt over the course of our childhood, because it was just very, very rough. You know, my mom left when we were very young, and then my dad took responsibility for us, as you know, I'm grateful that he did. But he, like a lot of men, thought at that time particularly that he needed a woman to do the job, and he went out and he found somebody who he married, and who felt very strongly that we were the poison fruit of another tree, and we were not in any way of interest to her throughout and even still to this day. She's now, and I say this with ever such respect, she has Alzheimer's, and she is now in a nursing home and is at the final stages of Alzheimer's. So, you know, God bless her soul, and I ache for her, but, you know, I haven't had much of a good rapport with her through the course of time, because she viewed us as competition for my dad's attention, which furthered my sister's and my self-esteem issues. And it really wasn't until, like I said, very recently, I started doing astropsychology, Glenn Perry's program. And for me, this last year, I'm finished with the first year, and I have started the second year of the program. What I have found is that this program has helped me immensely to identify what it is that has been kind of, you know, where I've been kind of stuck or stagnant, you know, not able to see everything. And really, quite frankly, it is such a relief to be able to look now and see, yes, my dad was deeply religious, that ninth house energy, Saturn, and that for me, overcoming in the most simple of ways, house and home from my childhood, a real obstacle, okay? But I did it, and a lot of people do. Now, a lot of times, there's a couple different houses where, you know, self-esteem is going to really stand out as a process that you're going to be mired in in a reading, and one of them would be, in my opinion, second house, and the other one would be in the fifth house. And why the fifth house? Well, that's developmentally when you're going to start dating, and you're going to start sort of figuring yourself out differently, you know, that you are, you do have other skills. And, you know, a lot of times high school sort of separates us, doesn't it? You know, myself, I was considered a bookworm. I wasn't popular in any way at all. You know, the kids, you know, if I came into the cafeteria with my lunch tray, you know, the whole group would get up and move to a different table. So it was pretty clear to me, you know, that I wasn't the most popular child on the planet, and you know, and that's okay. You know, I wasn't popular with me. So not being popular with me had everything in the world to do with how, when I would walk into a room, would impact others. Okay, so you know, keep that in mind. But there was nothing wrong with me. Not then, not now, not ever. There was really nothing wrong with me. What was wrong with me was what I was telling myself it all meant, and that's often what we do. So self-esteem, how to overcome, what kind of things would you maybe want to do? Well, one of the interesting things about Saturn, okay, in my case where it is the second house, you will work hard when you have a Saturn placement your entire life to overcome that. And in overcoming my second house, it takes me to the 8th house of sharp truths, Pluto, things that are uncomfortable to talk about, right? Which is what I'm doing right here. The outcome is that I fight through the limitations of the second house, not having what I need, not having clothing. And now one of the downsides to this is it's easy to become an overspender, and this is something I've had to really watch, because you know, it's easy to do therapy shopping when you have self-esteem issues. Maybe if I dress a little better, maybe if I get my hair done a certain way, maybe if I wear makeup I'm more attractive, people will like me, you know, all of those kind of things. Self-esteem, okay? But none of it will ever be resolved until I myself, do the work. So me thinking in high school that other kids really didn't like me was a projection. Okay, that's how projection works. I'm thinking something that really isn't exactly how it is. I'm not telling myself the truth. They're not coming anywhere close to you because, well, you're not allowing closeness to yourself. You know, just, you know, that being part of the process. I don't know why there's so many flies here today. Oh my goodness. Anyway, so self-esteem and how it impacts. Now I can say that I rushed out, and I first out of the gate, like I said, and had children and thought I was just groovy and, you know, knew what I was doing. But in my heart of hearts, what I was thinking, that I took the first person who came along, because I personally didn't feel worthy in the self-esteem department to have a partner. My son in Leo, where my parents, my dad, young, spiritual, thought he knew things, didn't really know so much, thought he was doing the right thing, not really, you know. And this is typical. This is an ancestral wound that we have right now, that, you know, for instance, finding that a number of children that we're finding at grave sites. Now I'm kind of borrowing a little bit of information that I got from a fellow podcaster who did something, you know, about kind of the children up in Canada, where they're the grave sites of the indigenous children. You know, we have wounding here, and we have a lot of it, and we are awakening to some truths. And yet we're a people that wants to legislate. We want to say no to the jab, and that it's our body, our right. And we want to then legislate to women what they can do with their bodies, which I find that to be such an oxymoron in a way. And why are we doing this? Where are we coming from? I would say that we are coming from a place of low self-esteem. I think that there is a large population of people that want a homogeneous society that keeps them in power. They fear change. They fear change because they haven't known trust or dignity. So we're at a time like no other. I'm feeling that it takes the vulnerability as I sit here today and tell you some of my story, to help begin to take a look underneath things and start asking ourselves the right questions about how we've developed into who we are here, now, and today. So one of the things I'm hoping comes out of this is that if you're somebody like myself, who really has struggled over the course of time with a sense of who you are, I want to hear from you. I want you to mention in the comments section. You know, you don't have to tell me your whole story. Private message me and tell me your story. But tell me you're there, because we all need each other at this time. We need each other as a roadmap of how to rebuild and how to rebuild better. Because I think that as things have happened as they are right now, some of our illness has to do with deep-seated pain. As within, so without. As above, so below. And we need to do the self-esteem work in order to provide a better place for all of us. We're all in pain. And so, Saturn in the second, for me, generally self-esteem is going to be Saturn in the fifth, with various aspects going with it. Mine happened to work out to be in the second, which I don't find terribly out of place in that sense for the particular aspects that I have that really do point back and forth to a process that I've been in, and how I've gone about living my life and growing past it. My chart says that. It says that I work hard to evolve past it, and I do. So today what we're going to simply do is we're just going to ask the Witch's Tarot, and I brought my selenite stick to scrub the cards, but we will just go ahead and do a 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Knock the past out of them, and then we're going to shuffle 3 times, and this is the Witch's Tarot. And we're going to just ask the divine to talk to us about self-esteem. What can we do? How can we go about looking at it, forgiving ourselves for the many things that we've done in the process of low self-esteem? You know, the jealousy, the many things. You know, there's too many things to mention. I mean, you know, I've felt envy, I've felt rage, I've been mad at people, I've held grudges, you know, you name it, I've done it all, you know, as we all have, okay? But what can you do? Self-esteem. In my case, I decided to get an education. I decided that this program, that it's cheaper than counseling to go learn about myself. So, you know, go ahead and do it. You know, over time, I could spend thousands and thousands of dollars and not know who I am, or I can go and learn astrology, as I have done, and know exactly who I am and how I impact the world and how the world is impacting me. Okay, I am going to put the camera down so you can see the cards. Let me just make sure that's oh yeah, that's a nice big view. Okay, and I'm going to spread them out. There's not much wind here today. The other day when I was here, it was Hurricane Linda, so it was a difficult. Let's see. Yeah. Let's see. Can you see him if I bring him that way? Nope, it's that way. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to select 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And you know, it's funny, yesterday somebody had posted on Facebook, and I just found this just almost interesting and funny, considering I wanted to do this podcast. People think that the governor here in Hawaii, who's in authority, okay, is basically, there's 2. Anyway, they think he's basically telling a story about the number of people in hospitals here, and I assure you that's not true. They do not want to shut down, let me just fix this a little bit. Anyway, they don't want to shut down tourism, but they may have to, because our numbers here are just absolutely off the hook. Okay, so what we're going to do is self-esteem. Okay, so this reading starts out in the self-esteem as the sun. I moved again because my camera was getting too warm. It was just taking too much sun on it. But anyway, speaking of the sun. And the sun, that is an interesting card to get for your, basically, when you consider that self-esteem. Your father is represented also by the sun. Saturn for his authority and limitations that he placed on you, and sun for the level of ego or that lacking therein that you get from having a father. And in my case, my dad was highly traditional, and he believed little girls, you know, washed dishes and boys played hockey, you know, and that was a very common experience, that my sister and I were responsible for all things feminine, regardless of whether it was appropriate or not, and to be of service. So we learned as children to compromise, to get along, and to be of service in order to move forward. And so, you know, very difficult, very, very difficult, because you grow up and you realize, wait a minute, you know, I'm more than just a role that I play, and in fact I might not be the role I play at all, and I think that is you know, part of, as we as women, we experience this pretty heavily, because, you know, we are viewed as the homemakers, or, you know, especially my generation, where, you know, we were kind of expected to go to work and help provide, yes, but we were also expected, and we are still expected, a lot of us. Now my husband has to do a lot of the housework and all of that at this time, because really I don't have as much in me with the cancer as I had at one time. Now I'm going to say, I want to just say this about the cancer, where I ended up developing cancer, which is really interesting, is up in my throat area. I ended up with a tumor in my neck that was 44 grams. I didn't have a voice in my childhood. I didn't have a voice. I didn't have a way to speak. So, oh, and I forgot to put my dang microphone on. Oh my God. There we go. Okay, hopefully I didn't lose too much. Again, that sun, okay, is the card that we're talking about right now. And how your father plays a role in that development of your ability to see yourself in a healthy way, okay? And so fathers, I mean, I want to say this, we generally think as mothers, the mother as being such an important part of a child's self-esteem and ability to grow, but man alive, I'm telling you right now, it is deeply as much so the father as anything that you'll ever know, you know? I mean, when my daughter, or my father is delighted in me, I feel delighted in myself. So, you know, with that being said, you know, and you can see this, you know, that this very young person with this sun overhead up on a white steed, how we see our fathers, you know, it's magical. We see them as our sunflowers, the sun and the moon. We see them as our, they don't know that, but the role they play, because ancestrally they just haven't been taught either. They're taught that you go to work, you provide a paycheck, and you know, and your job is done. You take care of mama, and everything else falls into place. But that, you know, not so much. That's not really true. That's what we've been told, but that isn't really true. Oops, 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 oops. Okay, I gotta run and grab cards. I like doing my podcasts at the beach, and they have their downsides doing them at the beach. Okay, so I'm going to get that card back where it belongs. The sun. Okay, so that's where we're at. The Witch's Tarot. Okay, I'm going to just put this piece of selenite there to protect it. Okay, and what do we have next? Well, we have the Nine of Swords. You know, for people who have self-esteem issues, It is kind of like a nightmare. It's painful, you know. You're going to wake up one day and find out the monster under the bed is you. You know, not an easy thing to do, and not an easy thing to live with, and not easy to be honest with yourself about why you might feel the way you do. But largely, you know, how you were told as a child has everything to do with perhaps how you see yourself, and it takes, in my case, a number of years sometimes to outgrow that. Now, my sister and I have been for years working on shadow work. We just both have, because, well, even to this day, there's not been any adults in our life that have taken any responsibility for the things that have taken place in our, and you know, there's a book out that I read that's called The Glass Castle, where she is a very famous person in journalism in New York, I believe, and with one of the major media companies. And basically, her childhood, I read The Glass Castle, and although my childhood wasn't exactly the same, there were so many parallels that it was one of the better books I've read for just kind of finding who I was, or finding, you know, how broken things really were, and how I've been seeing things through very fractured pieces of glass. I found that book very helpful. So The Glass Castle is worth reading if you have a chance. And this is the Nightmare card, the Nine of Swords, things that are in your mind that feel heavy, that you wish to have go away. Okay, the Nightmare card. And then it is the Lovers. Now that is an interesting card. Okay, this is the second arcana. So we had the Sun, you know, the father figure and how we view our fathers. But the Lovers, that people get together and they have relationships, dysfunctional relationships, codependent relationships. This card often, you see it, and this one depicts a man and a woman holding hands and kissing, but and then there's an angel up above. But often I find this card also sort of like being tied to the devil, okay, the Lovers, because we come into relationships with rules and ideas and thoughts, and how functional is all of that. You know, like in my dad's case, where he married my mom, and he probably thought he had this sweet little wife that was always going to stay home and want to be with her children, and she had children, and I can tell you that immediately she had postpartum depression, and the house was a mess, and our lives were in chaos, and she just truly wasn't interested in the job that my dad thought so sure she was wanting and was ready for. In fact, it wasn't true, and it wasn't even fair to put that burden on her, but that is what they agreed to, okay, and it led to them being codependent. They were both alcoholic, and really into quite a bit of shenanigans. You know, they both were, if they weren't in the bar, they were drunk most of the time in my childhood, as I recall. So, you know, the Lovers, you know, being codependent and tied to each other in some not so good ways. Now, the Anchor card in this is a Five of Cups. You know, in this case, this is an interesting card to get. Out of the five of us, there's really only two cups still able to hold water, and that is mine and my sister's. Because, well, we've been honest with ourselves about the state of our childhood. We've been honest with ourselves about the relationships that we've been in. We've had each other throughout all of it, and that is our Anchor card, and it goes directly back to the Sun, where my dad being in charge, and this, my sister and I, being the reason that we survived, that our cups are still standing. In our family, you know, my mom is still alive, but to this day really chooses not to be in a relationship with any of us. She sort of is in a relationship with my sister, but it's a relationship that is more to meet her needs than it is to meet my sister's needs. So again, that self-worth process has been just mashed, you know, for us. And then we get the Six of Pentacles. You know, how we got objects even was really strenuous. I mean, my brothers, my two stepbrothers and my brother, they got to play hockey. And my sister and I were required to prepare their gear and to be of service to their needs. And the six, if you think about it, you know, he's handing out coin, and you can see the little boy right there has got a smile on his face as he receives the coin, and the little girl is kind of looking down, maybe not so thrilled, because she knows that it's just a coin she's going to have to give, because that is what's required of her. Okay, and so, you know, a difficult, you know, for a child with self-esteem, you know, even objects, how things were used or are used, can have an impact on a child. So do keep that in mind. You know, if you've got children now, you know, and you have the opportunity to take a look at some of this self-esteem stuff, please do, because, you know, children today more than ever need us as adults to show our empathy and our well-being for their well-being. And what is the final card? The Star. It is saying that, yes, there is this process where you had one foot in and one foot out of the collective, and that you weren't totally prepared, but yet you were. That it's a process by divine guidance that you were and have gone through what you've agreed to. So in that sense, on my part, there is no, I have no bitterness at all towards my childhood. I honestly wish that my dad could acknowledge a few things, but he's only able to acknowledge what he's able to see. So that's not something that's ever going to occur. But at the same time, there's hope. There's this star. And what I believe this is it's a couple of different things. It's saying there's hope for myself and my sister, whom I'm referring to at this point, in our self-worth, who we are both doing, you know, as well as one could expect. But there's hope for other people like us. And the sun is something else. It wants to provide that hope and that way forward for us, okay? And because we got the Lovers, this reading is largely about these three cards right here. The three major arcanas is the sun, which we got first, right? Being the father and the mother and how they come together and create, and whether or not that can work for the good of all sometimes leads to a nightmare, which this card is saying by divine guidance this occurs, to create, to blend, to forge something new, because the star is one of hope. And with that, I thank you for joining me here today on a brief discussion of Saturn, self-esteem, and a personal look into some of my configurations. And with that, I would ask that you please go to, I'm going to put the camera up, go to www.twiggy.com. We are running some specials at this time to introduce ourselves to you. There's myself and my co-reader, Pearl Rowland, and she is trained in shadow reading, that is really my forte, is shadow reading. We're available for astrology, numerology, and tarot. So please do look us up. And I thank you very much for joining us here today.